We're going to head over to Abuja now. Dr. Ernest is there with us, going to be taking us through the first 100 days of our governors. Dr. Ernest Ereke is a senior lecturer at the University of Abuja and coordinator of Yaga African Center for Legislative Engagement. Welcome to the program, Doctor.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yes, Dr. Ereke, thank you for honoring our invitation. It's been 100 days since governors were, sworn in for either for a second term or for a fresh time in office. And also President Buhari was also sworn in for a second time in office at the federal level. Now, what's your take on what Nigerians have witnessed in the last 100 days? And, do you think that the 100 days, celebration or, ritual is significant enough, or you think it's just much ado about nothing? We need to give government more time before we begin to raise questions about their performance.
Okay, thank you very much. I think it is too early for us to be celebrating the 100 days performance of governors and the government that we have elected, because these governments were elected for 4 years. And so for me, I believe that it is a celebration of tokenism for governors to roll out the drums and begin to celebrate the little achievements they have made. Of course, Nigerians know that these governors delight in such celebrations, because governors believe that we, the people, should be grateful to them for the opportunities we have given them to serve. Governors in Nigeria believe that they are philanthropists, and then as philanthropists, the people should always be grateful to them. And so for me, I believe that celebration of 100 days is not something is not really a big deal, especially given the challenges that Nigerians have been facing ever since after the elections and the inauguration of the governments. We have seen a very slow takeoff of governance across the country. All the challenges that we were faced with before the elections are still there with us. We are still facing security threats and challenges of different kinds, from kidnappings to farmers' herders' clashes. We are still having governors not being able to pay salaries across the states in the country, and not even to talk about paying pensions. And so for me, governance has been very, very slow. Most of the governors have not really hit the ground running as Nigerians would have expected. And so for the governors to begin to celebrate and jubilate that they have spent just 100 days out of 4 years in office, for me, is a celebration of tokenism.
Okay, Dr. Ereke, I understand your take here, but I'd also like to be a bit more optimistic about certain governors. I'd like to actually focus for 1 second on the governor of my state, Seyi Makinde, who, before even 100 days, had come out to let us know himself what achievements the Oyo State government have had over the past 3 months. And I can't lie to you, I'm the most critical person that you will ever find of the government, but I was very surprised in his breakdown. Have you looked at his breakdown on his first 100 days? And if you have, what is your take on it? Because he has done quite a lot in terms of public-private partnerships for agriculture and education with WIAC, with the World Bank, etc. And it seems as though a lot of things are coming to fruition. Do you still share the same viewpoint that you share as a general consensus towards a governor like Seyi Makinde?
Well, while I would join millions of Nigerians to celebrate and commend the governor of Oyo State, but then again, I will also desist from eulogizing him so much, because the governor has not done anything outside what he was elected to do. Of course, you are familiar with the saying that in the land of the blind, a one-eyed man is a king. Governor Makinde, of course, commendably is doing what he was elected to do as the governor of Oyo State. And by the time we stop celebrating these governors, by the time we stop celebrating government officials for carrying out the tasks and responsibilities we have given them to execute, then they will begin to realize that they are really not monarchs, they are really not philanthropists. They have been elected to provide for the basic needs of the people. They have been elected to provide security for the people. They have been elected to provide governance. And so when they are providing governance like the governor of Oyo State is doing, yes, we should commend him, but we should not over-celebrate because simply he is doing what he's been elected to do. We do not go about clapping for fathers and parents who have been able to pay their children's school fees. We do not go about celebrating parents who have been able to provide food for their kids. And therefore, I believe that despite the fact that some governors are doing well, we should not begin to jubilate and celebrate these governors because simply they have been elected to do exactly what we are seeing in Oyo State.
Well, fair enough, fair enough. But the 100 days ritual, coming shortly after inauguration and a general election, provides us an opportunity to measure the pace at the federal level and also at the state level, and to assess the capacity of the persons that have been elected into office. Leila just brought up the example of the governor in Oyo State, Seyi Makinde. We hope that he will sustain the momentum. But are there any other governors, across the country that you have seen that you think has been able to hit the ground running? I ask this question considering the fact that in about 19 states, we don't have commissioners yet. And the governors give excuses. Either they are still looking for people that they know or, they want to save money to be able to pay salaries. And so you have them running, the state more or less alone. What do you say to that?
Well, for me, any governor who is still telling us that he is still searching for those he knows that will help him run the government or the administration is really not ready, for governance. Because before now, they should have been able to identify those who will be able to join them in the administration of their various states. And then, of course, talking about governors who have equally hit the ground running like we are seeing in Oyo State, you can talk about the governor of Ebonyi State.
Dr. Ereke, if you could just hold your thoughts. We'll take a short commercial break, and then when we continue, when we return, you can continue with your statements on this. We'll be right back. You're still watching The Morning Show here on the Arise News channel. And with us from our Abuja studio is Dr. Ernest Ereke, Senior Lecturer at the University of Abuja and Coordinator, Yaga Africa Center for Legislative Engagement. Now, Dr. Ereke, you were saying something about, governors who have not been able to appoint commissioners and governors who have managed to hit the ground running. And you were beginning to give additional examples.
Yes, I said in addition to Seyi Makinde of Oyo State, we also know that the governor in Ebonyi State is equally doing a very good job, especially in terms of providing infrastructural development in Ebonyi State. However, maybe what I think we should do is to look at the genesis and origin of this 100 days celebration that our governors are so enticed, with. Because if you go back to the 1930s, when President Roosevelt was holding sway in the U.S., you record that there was a great depression of the economies across the world. And so Roosevelt, within the first 100 days in office, knew that there was an emergency. It was an emergency situation, and he was able to, address some of the challenges that the U.S. economy was faced with. And that was a milestone, that was a benchmark that was set by a president. But when you take, Nigeria as a situation, we are faced with a host of challenges. And so if our governors should be celebrated, they should be celebrated on the basis that they realize that we are faced with emergency situations. They realize that we are beset with a lot of challenges. and therefore they take measures, they take steps, they initiate programs, policies, and projects that will quickly, address the challenges that Nigerians are faced with across the country, like Roosevelt did in 1933. But we are really not seeing that. And then, of course, we must also realize that in a bid to ensure that you have something to celebrate within the first 100 days in office, some of these governors embark upon shoddy jobs so that they will be able to show something within the first 100 days in office.
Yes, you are quite right about Franklin Delano Roosevelt and his New Deal in the 1930s at its time of a great economic depression in the United States. But you have talked about, the state governors. We have mentioned Oyo, you have mentioned Ebonyi. How about Imo, Sokoto, Ogun, where we have also seen a lot of productivity, Rivers. There are some other states. And then would you like to comment on what the federal government has done in the last 100 days of President Buhari's second term in office?
Well, of course, while we are saying that most of our governors are not doing well, that is not to say that a few of them are equally not performing, like the ones you have mentioned. Yes, we are seeing some level of performance in some of those states that you have mentioned. But like I said, we must not over-celebrate these governors because they believe, like I said earlier, that whatever they do is an act of philanthropy for Nigerians who rightly have elected them, to serve them. And then, of course, at the federal level, yes, the federal government took off on a very slow pace, especially as it took the president a very long time, to constitute his cabinet. So governance has really been very slow. And then we are equally aware that Federal Executive Council meetings have not been able to hold for some time now. And then a lot of decisions that should have been taken by the Council may not have been taken. And so governance really is still a little bit slow at the federal level.
Okay, Dr. Ereke, let me bring in something else here, which is the fact that it's seemingly so difficult for governors, presidents, whoever, to hold their predecessors accountable for a lot of issues that are clear and evident, such as state coffers being left empty before a lot of governors come into office. Yet there's no way to hold the person before you accountable for their actions of leaving these coffers empty. For example, it was stated that Makinde said he met a situation where 50% of a project goes back to the governor, 30% to the appointee, 10% to the governor's wife, and only 10% actually goes to the project itself. We can have this knowledge. There can even be evidence of this knowledge, but then holding the person before you accountable becomes a problem. You're into legislature. Surely there is something that we can do to start working on a model whereby we are encouraging continuity of government, which is one of our greatest issues, by ensuring that predecessors can be held accountable.
Well, I think it would be wrong to say that predecessors cannot be held accountable for their actions.
But they're not held accountable
in government, because we have. Well, they are held accountable because there are laws, there are provisions in our laws, there are institutions in our governance system that ensure that these governors should be held accountable.
Yes, they should be, Doctor, that's my point, but they are not.
As a people,
they should be, but they are not.
Yes.
These laws are not enforced. That's what I'm saying.
Exactly the issue. We have all of these laws, we have all of the agencies, we have the institutions that should be able to hold some of these governors to account. But our problem, as you rightly pointed out, is that we have not been able to enforce some of the laws that we have. For instance, we know, even sometimes when we try to enforce some of these laws to prosecute some of these persons, we know that it has taken so long, to prosecute them. For instance, there are governors who served between 1999 up to 2007, and they are still in court. the courts have not been able to dispense with the cases that were instituted against some of these governors for the actions they took while in office. And so for me, it is not about not having a measure or policies or programs to hold some of these governors to account. It is because as a people, most times we are scared of putting our laws to test. Even when we put these laws to test, some of these things take a very long time in coming. Again, because of political expediency.
Can I give you another viewpoint on that, Doctor? Sorry. What if it's not that we're not putting the laws to test, right? Because look at what the EFCC did with ex-Governor Ambode in Lagos, yes? So it's not as if we're not putting the laws to test, but we're putting the laws to test for the wrong reasons. Because what has come of the EFCC's probing of ex-Governor Ambode, for example?
Well, exactly the same issues we are talking about. When you politicize some of these things for political expediency, then it means that you will be applying the laws for the wrong reasons. Now, if you really want to combat corruption in the country, you must not politicize the war or the fight against corruption. If you must fight corruption, you must ensure that the law applies to everybody, no matter how highly or lowly placed that person is in the country. Again, political issues must be kept out of the fight against corruption and misgovernance in the country. For instance, as I was saying, most times for political expediency, some of the successors equally will feel that it will be a waste of time, and then they will be losing a lot of political mileage if they go ahead and probe or look into the activities of their predecessors. But for me, the issue still remains that we have policies, we have laws, we have agencies that should be able to hold some of these former political office holders to account. However, the point still remains that we politicize, the fight against corruption. We politicize the activities of institutions and agencies of government. Sometimes, as we have seen in Nigeria and across Africa, we personalize and privatize state institutions that should ordinarily stand above everybody in the society. But whenever we begin to privatize, when we begin to personalize institutions of the state, institutions of democracy that should be able to function for everybody within the society, whenever we begin to personalize, whenever we begin to have individuals who are stronger than the institutions of the state hijack some of these institutions, then we'll have a situation where people will come, serve, loot the public purse, and then there will be no sanctions for such criminal acts as a result of the fact that we have big men and not strong institutions in Nigeria.
Well, Dr. Ereke, I mean, Leila raised a question about accountability. And, you've taken all of that and you've talked about individuals versus institutions. But to make our governors, our state governors in Nigeria more accountable, what should be the proper role of the state houses of assembly? These state houses of assembly have become more or less rubber stamp assemblies. And then at the federal level, what kind of national assembly would you like to see, in terms of accountability? But we'll take a short break now. When we return, you can then respond to this. Don't go away. Stay tuned. You're still watching The Morning Show here on the Arise News channel. And with us still is Dr. Ernest Ereke, Senior Lecturer in the Department of Political Science, University of Abuja, Nigeria. Dr. Ereke, I'd asked you a question about oversight, accountability, and what role the legislature can play to make sure that governors don't just do what they like, or generally that the executive arm of government does not just break the law. And then after the immunity of the affected persons has expired, then we begin to complain about, cases going on in court forever. Couldn't we have prevented that with the legislature playing its role? And why is it that the legislature in Nigeria is so docile and acquiescent?
Well, I agree with you that we can nip some of these acts in the bud if the legislature is able to play its role of holding the executive to account. But as you also mentioned earlier, we all know that the legislature at the state level, the legislature is really mere rubber stamps in the hands of governors in various states across the country, partly because of the lack of financial autonomy before now. Yeah, despite the fact that financial autonomy has been granted to states' houses of assembly, we still have a situation where the state houses of assembly will have to go to the governors to negotiate what part or what percentage of the funds accruing to the state will be given to the legislature. And so you still have a situation where, in spite of the fact that, yes, we have granted state houses of assembly autonomy, but the autonomy is really not enough in order to grant the state houses of assembly that kind of independence we expect that they should have from the state governors. And so we'll continue to have a situation whereby the state houses of assembly will always pander to the dictates and wishes of the executive governor. And so for as long as state houses of assembly are not able to play this role of oversight and holding the governors to check and to account, then the governors will continue to have a free ride. And then, of course, again, we must also not forget how some of the members of the state houses of assembly emerged in the first place. We have a situation where governors will sit down and nominate, or as it were, appoint whoever will occupy a position, whether elected or appointed positions across the states. And so some of these persons in the state houses of assembly feel that their loyalty is first and foremost to the governor and not to the people of the state. And so as a result of some of these factors, as a result of also capacity, the low capacity level of some of the members of the state houses of assembly, some of them do not really have the capacity and the competence to be able to do the jobs that they have elected to do. Then we'll continue to have some of these situations. But generally, the legislature, as we know, should be able to hold the executive to account. And if the legislature is able, both at the national level and at the state level, if the legislature is able to play the role of oversight, checking the activities of the executive, some of these things that we see governors do, or some of the things we see the executive, members of the executive do, will really be nipped in the bud. And for the 9th Assembly, I expect that having Ahmed Lawan as the Senate President, Ahmed Lawan, who is vast and whose legislative competence is within the area of oversight, we expect that the 9th Assembly should be able, to play, to be more serious as far as oversight is concerned, as far as holding the executive to account is concerned, because it really doesn't make any sense for the legislature to sit year in, year out. You make laws, you appropriate funds, and these funds are not applied for the right reasons for which the legislature has, appropriated those funds. And so it is expected that the 9th Assembly should be able to hold the executive to account this time. They should be able to up their game as far as oversight functions are concerned. Yes, we know that there are challenges as far as oversight is concerned in Nigeria. The committees of the legislature will always complain that they do not have the needed funds to be able to do the oversight functions. They will complain about resources. They'll complain about vehicles. They'll complain about a lot of. They'll complain about expertise. And so there are challenges, to oversight in Nigeria. But we believe that with the political will on the part of the legislature to hold the executive to account, some of these challenges will be overcome. Yes, of course, we know that when we talk about funding, when the legislature begins to appropriate funds for committees, to perform their functions, Nigerians will always cry out that the legislature is taking so much, as we have seen, people talk about it in times past. And so these are some of the challenges that, the legislature faces as far as oversight function is concerned, especially because we have a bicameral legislative system in Nigeria.
Okay, thank you for that viewpoint. So going back to 100 days for a second and focus on another particular governor, let's take the governor of Lagos State, Sanwo-Olu, for example. Now, this is someone who ran a campaign with so many decorations that you'd be seeing them in your nightmares and your best dreams. Came out to say that in his first 60 days, Apapa gridlock would be over. Then he said, no, in my first 100 days. Then he said he never said it at all. What do you think about the first 100 days of the governor of the largest city in the country, Lagos, or largest state, Lagos State?
Well, I think I'll speak on the issue of the Apapa gridlock, saying that it will take 60 days and eventually denying that he didn't say so. It goes to show that political leaders in the country do not really do enough as far as conducting researches into the challenges facing the society before they make pronouncements and statements. So spurred by the events of the moment, and driven by the need to tell the people what they really want to hear, they make promises that are not really empirically founded. And so eventually, when they get into office, they will discover that the situations are really different from what they saw, from outside. And so I believe that the governor of Lagos State is one of those political leaders who didn't really do his research, very well before making some of those promises that he made. And for me, Lagos is a very important state in Nigeria as far as business activities and commercial activities are concerned. And Lagos State should be able to have one of the best governors that we should be proud of in Nigeria.
I also stand corrected. Kano State is largest by population, not Lagos, but most commercial, I should have said.
Anyway, Dr. Ereke, I like the fact that you drew attention to the point about financial autonomy for state legislature. As part of its reform agenda, the Buhari administration is also talking about financial autonomy for state judiciary. But how about the local councils? There's also an issue about financial autonomy for local governments. And the federal government is proposing an amendment to section 162, subsection 6, and subsection 8 of the 1999 Constitution, dealing with state local government joint account. And then before then, of course, you recall that the Nigeria Financial Intelligence Unit had, on the basis of an executive order by President Buhari, given a number of directives about how banks should treat allocations to local councils. What's your take on this issue of financial autonomy for local government councils? Do you think it will work much better? Do you think it is desirable?
Well, yes, of course, it is very, very desirable. In fact, I would say that it is imperative that we grant the local governments a financial autonomy in the country, because when you look at local governments, we always say that it is the closest government to the people. It is the government that the people really see. It is the government that the people really feel. It is the government that the people really feel is their own because it is very, very close to them. However, over the years, especially since 1999, local governments have been reduced to mere departments of state governments, where the governors feel that local government funds is just available for bazaar. And so you will also recall that in time past, the National Assembly tried to amend the laws so that local governments will be granted financial autonomy. But state houses of assembly eventually, killed that idea, and so local governments were not granted that financial autonomy. Yes, I know it is going to be an uphill task, to get the local governments granted financial autonomy, because eventually, even when you amend the Constitution still requires support from state houses of assembly in order for such amendments to take effect. And like we said earlier, these state houses of assembly are still appendages of state governors. And so I believe it is going to be a very difficult task, but it is one that is worth doing if we are serious about democracy in Nigeria, if we are serious about development, because local governments, like we said, are closest to the people. They can drive rural development and grassroots development. They can support political socialization and all of those functions that are attributed to local governments. And so I want to believe that, yes, it will be very, very difficult to achieve, but it is something worth doing if we are really desirous of, number one, driving the process of grassroots development, and secondly, cutting the wings and powers of state governors who have become so powerful that they believe that they are emperors and monarchs in Nigeria.
Okay,
by the
Dr.
time we
Ernest,
are able to grant local governments financial autonomy...
Sorry, I'm so sorry. For the sake of time, we'd also like to move on to another discussion for the next 3 or 4 minutes, which is topical, the xenophobic attacks that are currently going on in South Africa. We'd like to get your take on these attacks that are going on. Please do share with us.
Well, my take on that is that it is a manifestation of the failure of leadership and governance in South Africa, as a result of the failure of governments to provide the needs of their people, to meet the needs of their people. The people are frustrated, they are angry, of course, and then we know that a hungry man is an angry man. But the truth is that they have misplaced their frustration, they have misdirected their anger on the wrong persons, because they have targeted fellow African nationals, believing that they are the reasons why they are either unemployed, why their government is unable to fight crime, why their government is unable to provide jobs and foods for the people. And so the South Africans have a misplaced anger and frustration, and they are taking it out on the wrong persons instead of taking it out on their government, instead of holding their own government to attack. I mean to check and to account. And so I believe that the xenophobic attacks in South Africa is, for me, is one of the manifestations of the failure of governance and leadership across African states. It is just manifesting in South Africa, or it has been there in South Africa. We are also seeing the same thing in some other African societies and African states. For instance, if you go to Ghana, it is being made so much difficult for Nigerian businesses to continue to exist and thrive in Ghana. And so across Africa, as a result of the failure of governance and as a result of the failure of leadership by the political elites, we continue to have such anger and such frustrations. But for me, one of the most important things that we have not seen is that the South African government has refused to recognize these attacks as xenophobic. They continue to call it criminal acts instead of calling it the right word that it is.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank
you very much, Dr. Ernest Ereke. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Doctor.
We've enjoyed our conversation with you clearly.